Innovation and creativity are central to entrepreneurship. But what happens when you go beyond the edge? The Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast brings you the world's first, the disruptive, the avant-garde. We take you to the frontier in conversation with the entrepreneurs who are the forerunners of the industries of the future. Get to know their world with co-hosts Braden, Kemp, and Tracy Morningstar. A shipping container is being dropped off in your backyard. Inside the shipping container is a fully automated and controlled environment for modular farming. You're about to start producing thousands of pounds of your own shiitake mushrooms. Production just got local. With advancements in robotics, AI, and machine learning, now you're at the frontier of an agricultural revolution.
Hello, I'm Tracy Morningstar, your host for this episode of the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, Braden Kemp. Hello, Braden.
Hey, Tracy. Good morning.
Today, we're taking you to the frontier with Christopher Klich from Mycro Harvest. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tracy and Braden. Really happy to be here.
Can you share what sparked your interest in the field and led you to create your company?
Can definitely start about what brought me to work on mushrooms. And essentially it was my background before this. I worked in architectural products and kind of design. And that led me to learn about mushroom-based products. And then when I met my co-founder through Entrepreneur First, he had a background in smart farming and also in agriculture and a focus on mycology. And so we really started honing in on the mushroom space and realized that there's tons of room for growth, no pun intended, to really expand on that market. And we started digging into it more and more and understanding some of the problems that we're facing in the scalability of production for the space itself.
Do you tend to think of yourself as a tech entrepreneur with an interest in mushroom farming, or are you a mushroom farmer who's become a tech entrepreneur?
I think that I would say that it's more the former. I would like to think of myself more as a tech entrepreneur that has really delved into the world of mushroom production. And I think that that's because it allows me to adapt this kind of scalable mindset to a very traditional practice of farming mushrooms. And so, we went through a really in-depth customer discovery journey where we actually did a road trip across Canada and the US, exploring lots of different mushroom farms and understanding the process, and then went back to the drawing board kind of in that tech mindset to reimagine how we could optimize this process. So we're approaching it more from kind of the scalable tech entrepreneurship mindset, and that allows us to really achieve that growth long term.
Tell us about Mycro Harvest. Where's the company at right now, and how close are you to starting production?
Definitely. So Mycro Harvest, essentially what we're doing is we're taking the traditional production method for specialty mushrooms, which are traditionally grown on static shelves. And we're turning that system into an automated conveyor system, which significantly reduces labor and also optimizes the environmental conditions for increasing yield and reducing disease. It allows us to essentially produce mushrooms in much larger quantities and much healthier mushrooms for food, products, and more. Currently, we have a working prototype that is actually growing mushrooms today. It's a small-scale working prototype based in our offices in Waterloo, Ontario. We recently got into the Velocity Incubator there, and that's what we've been working on and growing our prototype there. And soon we will be piloting with some of the largest specialty mushroom farmers here in Canada.
Chris, you mentioned a road trip to get customer feedback.
Mm-hmm.
How does that AI and tech conversation go with traditional farmers?
So it's actually really difficult to get onto mushroom farms because a lot of the growing process, there is a strong belief among mushroom farmers that the growing process is highly personalized, and that the skill of each individual grower impacts the actual output of the farm. And so farmers are hesitant at first to talk about their growing practices. And so you really have to establish that trust early on. But what we really found was interesting during our customer discovery process and that road trip across Canada and the US was actually that a lot of farmers were experiencing scalability issues. So they were realizing that they could only manage a certain number of grow rooms before they were at their capacity, and they couldn't actually oversee more grow rooms. And so those were the ones that were most willing to talk to us, because they realized that as we started explaining some of our technology to them, it could be directly useful in providing value by allowing them to manage more rooms and by allowing their operations to grow where before they actually couldn't.
I want to follow that up. So you mentioned that a lot of these farmers note that their individual skill or process or knowledge is important in the production that they can achieve. Are you at the point now where you can say definitively that you can replace that with AI and tech, or is there still sort of a personal touch to it?
So currently every farm has almost a personal touch to it because of the individual aspects of each growing room. What we're attempting to do is standardize that growing room so that we can then use an automated system that will be able to optimize that specific grow room. And so that's why we're using the shipping containers, because it allows us a uniform platform that would enable the same grow room, whether it be in Ontario, BC, or up in the Yukon. And so that allows us to standardize the platform, and then we would be able to establish growth curves that would be very reliable across all those different climates. So right now, we're able to, within quite a good degree of accuracy, deliver very similar, if not optimized, yields from what a traditional grower would be able to provide. And because of our low cost of data acquisition and our quick grow cycles, we're able to actually really hone in on that algorithm and improve it so that it actually will be able to, in very short amount of time, deliver better yields than what was traditionally possible.
That's great. Very impressive.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the mushrooms that you're producing. Are they native to Canada, or are you outsourcing the type of mushrooms that you're producing?
That's a great question. So the mushrooms we're focusing on are actually specialty mushrooms. So they fall under the umbrella of pretty much anything other than agaricus mushrooms, which are your traditional like white button or portobello mushrooms. And so that's because the mushrooms that we're working on grow on distinct blocks of substrate instead of on a flat bed. And so the main mushrooms that we're focusing on right now are shiitake, oyster, and lion's mane. And most of these are not native to Canada, but keeping in mind that our mushrooms are grown in an enclosed environment, which is all temperature controlled. This is controlled environment agriculture. So we're focusing more on those ones right now, just because that's really where the demand in the market is. And then we would love to in the future see more kind of Canadian species of mushrooms that can be cultivated. That is one thing to note, that a lot of the Canadian mushrooms that are available on the market, many of them can't be cultivated, but rather are found and foraged in the wild. And that's where a lot of their value comes from as well. So
it's interesting that you bring that up because it's something that we had on the list to talk about. And so my mushroom knowledge is limited, but I guess I would say an enthusiastic forager of the handful or so that I can identify. Morels, chanterelles, puffballs, that sort of thing. And like you said, I understand there are some mushrooms that are notoriously hard or perhaps impossible to propagate indoors, morels being one of them. do you see a window that your tech could make this possible or easier? I got to imagine the market for a specialty mushroom like a morel that you could consistently grow would be huge.
Definitely. So the actual great thing about the tech that we're developing is we can tailor the grow cycle to each individual species of mushroom. So say we're going to focus on a specific type of mushroom, we can then optimize the environmental conditions. And so those are mainly 3 parameters that we're looking for. So humidity, temperature, and CO2 level are the 3 main metrics that we go by. And we can build out a growth curve of what the optimal conditions would look like. And then our system, which is a conveyor belt that runs in front of a computer vision camera, can then directly correlate those growth patterns with observations of the actual growth of those distinct mushrooms. And so that allows us to, once we've built out our individual data sets for certain species of mushrooms, we can quickly extrapolate that onto other species of mushrooms. And because we have such granular control and monitoring of the individual mushrooms as they grow, species that previously weren't able to be cultivated in the past may be more likely to be able to do so now.
Right. So you mentioned like humidity, temperature, CO2 level. You're simulating those growing conditions. Can you also simulate or are you simulating the networks and relationships that mushrooms seem to use in the wild to grow and spread? Is that done through the substrate?
So that's done through the substrate blocks as they're created. And so currently, essentially, the blocks are made of spawn and a substrate, which is the actual growing medium. So picture spawn as almost like the seed, and the medium, for example, for shiitake is hardwood sawdust. And so a grain spawn would be introduced, mixed with hardwood sawdust, and then the connections or mycelium, which is the root structure of the mushroom, is formed on that block. In the cultivation, kind of the larger volume cultivation that we're partaking in and producing, these are actually on distinct blocks. So unlike in nature where it would be a large kind of root structure that expands across an entire log, we compartmentalize it to single blocks. And so we're focusing mainly on these individual blocks because it allows us to, for example, if there's disease, isolate those specific blocks and remove them. So that allows us to really focus on the crop and the yield in the long term.
When we're gonna see the final version of your product, are we gonna see it in the farmers markets or the grocery stores? And are we gonna see them dried or fresh?
That's a great question, Tracy. So we are targeting to deliver the products fresh, and that can be through farmers markets and through grocery stores. The main motivation being is that the products are going to be now locally produced and locally sourced. Because of the modularity of our system, it can be it's a plug and play system that can be installed anywhere. And so, for example, even in a small town, we can actually just plug and play a single production unit, and that can be the source of fresh mushrooms for all of the local population, including through grocery stores and farmers markets. But our main focus is enabling that local production of food and unlocking the potential to have that food source really close to home.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be able to recognize the dried versions of your mushrooms as opposed to the fresh. So it's almost like something we're going to be happy to see, but it's going to look a little different.
Definitely. So you would find our products mainly in the refrigerator section, whereas before you'd be buying dried versions that come from abroad, like countries like China and Japan. Now you can get a Canadian version that's been produced just a couple kilometers from home.
Chris, you mentioned the close to home market, and earlier you said something about the Yukon I do a little bit of work in ag tech and food tech, and something that's a big topic of conversation right now is food security, specifically in the north. Yeah. Is there a line expansion to other crops here potentially in the future, or are you strictly focused on mushrooms?
So for now, we are strictly focused on mushrooms, but in the future, there is potential for expansion. The reason why we're focused on mushrooms right now is because we're developing a system that uses computer vision and artificial intelligence to monitor the crops. And one of the best things about mushrooms and mushroom cultivation is actually during the fruiting process, mushrooms can double in size every 24 hours. And they're very sensitive to the environmental conditions, and a grow cycle only lasts about 2 weeks. So when you think about a technology that requires constant iteration and in order to learn and refine the algorithms, a produce like mushrooms, which has a very quick grow cycle, is perfect because it allows us to really develop a very refined and accurate algorithm, which then can help us better inform the grow patterns on other crops that could also be grown in controlled environment agriculture.
I love seeing that kind of lean startup thinking of rapid iteration happening in an industry of ag, where typically you're talking about like growing seasons. You have a whole year, and then, okay, we'll try something different next year, and then wait another year and see what the result is, and you can turn that around in weeks. That's pretty wild. Definitely.
And if you think about that on also we can have a number of units running in at the same time, side by side, using different parameters, we can really have that closed feedback loop and those results a lot quicker than, for example, a seasonal grow cycle that, is only twice a year. Now we're talking about every 2 weeks.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Mushrooms have gained attention for their potential in various industries like packaging and bioremediation. Could you share some insights into the innovation application of the mushroom?
Yes, definitely. So the fresh produce section of mushrooms is actually just the beginning. And that's what we're really excited about. So initially, that's where our key value is providing fresh mushrooms. But beyond that, I think where the main growth is going to come from in the long term is really the products that can be made from mushrooms. So we're talking things like meat alternatives, bioplastics, leathers, and so much more. And essentially, those products right now currently don't have a scalable source of the raw material needed to produce the finished product. And so that's where our technology would really come in and enable the scalability of those products. So let's take, a mushroom-based plastic alternative for packaging. Currently, there isn't a system that can output enough to make it a cost-effective and viable alternative to plastic. But with our system, we would be able to scale a lot of the production of that raw material and really enable the creation of an entire ecosystem of sustainable mushroom-based products that were also produced locally in our own backyard. So that's one of the things that really excites me about our technology is we're currently refining it on kind of the highest margin product that we can produce, and then we can then expand it onto other hugely impactful products such as bioplastics, meat alternatives, leathers, and more.
Do you think with the AI and your algorithms and tech, are you going to be able to tailor some of the properties of these mushrooms specific to those industries?
So with the actual algorithms right now, we can already tailor the yield curve and also the actual date of fruiting. So we can actually advance or push back the date of production and fruiting based on what's needed from the algorithms. Whether that we will be able to change the actual material properties of the mushrooms or mycelium that we're producing, we'll still need a little bit more time to refine the algorithms to figure that out. But as it stands right now, we can mainly play around with the timing more than anything.
Is a mushroom something that you can crossbreed similar to what you can do with, tomatoes and apples and that sort of thing, or just a type of mushroom is a type of mushroom and that's how it's going to stay?
There are millions of species of mushrooms, and the actual composition of them is, there's thousands and thousands that can be cultivated already, even though it's not done commercially. So there is possibility to kind of change the individual breakdown of those mushrooms themselves. And then also a lot of that is dependent on the substrate that they're grown in. So one of the things that we can circle back to is that you mentioned earlier on, Tracy, was bioremediation. And that's a huge potential market for mushrooms because they can almost act as an aggregator for certain heavy metals and things like that to really clean up the soil. So a lot of the actual composition of the mushroom is still dependent on the substrate that it's grown in.
Have you seen on the bioremediation front? I keep, doing some research before we came to the call today. I keep seeing that. And is that something that has been done at lab scale and we believe that we can scale it up? Or are you aware of any actual in-practice bioremediation being done with mushrooms?
So that is one thing that we've been keeping our finger on the pulse with very closely because it is a massive market and also a huge environmental impact that mushrooms could really help with. At this stage right now, most of it is lab-based, and so it hasn't been done on a scalable level that we're outputting and cleaning thousands of pounds or tons of soil to be remediated. So right now it's currently lab and lab-based, and the theory is there and it does work on small scale. The real question is can we actually scale that? And Mycro Harvest can actually play a key role in that. But as right now, for right now, that's not our main focus, but we are definitely keeping an eye on it because it could be a huge growth opportunity for Mycro Harvest as well.
Absolutely. It sounds like there's any number of directions you could ultimately go in.
Definitely.
Are there any specific mycological marvels or fascinating insights you've discovered during your journey that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah. So some of the main things are just the actual sheer volume of the amount of mushrooms that are on this planet already, and even some that we haven't discovered yet, and the properties that these individual fungi have in order to be able to there's some research into mushrooms for their medicinal properties and then also their material properties. There's just such a huge possibility and endless possibilities for the use of mushrooms, and that's, I think, one of the key takeaways that I've had from this. When I think that we always have another use case that comes up, and it really comes down to can we produce this so that it's accessible to the everyday person, and so that's what is really exciting for me is unlocking that potential, and that's, I think, the key takeaway.
So we know, we kind of covered the potential for the output is broad. There's all sorts of different industries you can go into. The opportunities are endless. Who's the ideal customer for the system, and what kind of scale are we talking about in terms of output?
Definitely. So currently the system, we're targeting traditional producers of mushrooms, that's kind of our main customers right away, because those are the ones that really need the tech at the onset. And then we are then going to move on to producers of mushroom-based products. But to answer your question a little bit more specifically, the output for an individual unit is about 120,000 pounds of mushrooms per year. And so that's one 40-foot shipping container. And the idea is to have these put into units side by side. So a farm would comprise of roughly 8 or more units that would then be outputting all together. And so the main focus for that is kind of large mushroom producers, and then later on growing into producers of mushroom-based products.
Okay. Do I have to be a mushroom farmer to run this thing? Because I started doing math, right? 120,000 pounds from a 140-foot shipping container. Shiitakes are worth $10 to $20 a pound. There's money in that. Is there like kind of a single unit micro customer play here, or you just want to sell to big farms?
So that is one of the main reasons why we're focusing on mushrooms, because even the back of the napkin math that I'm sure you did in your head right there looks very positive, and in fact it is. The ROI is very quick. And one of the great things about micro harvest units is that because of the tech that's packed into the unit, you don't have to be a highly specialized mushroom farmer with lots of technical knowledge to be able to run a farm that delivers huge amount of yield and also profitability over the long term. So initially we are piloting and working with customers who do have that technical knowledge through the development process. And then later on, the goal is to scale up so that a general person could run the farm very easily, where our interface is very simple. So you can interact with it very easily, and allows almost anyone with basic agricultural knowledge to really run the system.
Sounds like I need to pour a concrete pad in my backyard because I've got a shipping container.
Definitely.
Dave Hunter, could you give us a little bit of info about your relationship with him and how this all started?
Definitely. So the whole company came together initially through Entrepreneur First, which is a accelerator for startup founders to come together, meet each other, and hopefully build a company together. That's where I met my co-founder, Justin. And we also were introduced to our mentor, Dave Hunter, who is the CEO of Optimal Ag. And essentially what they're doing is developing AI systems for greenhouses. And he's quite a few years ahead of us in the development phase, focusing specifically on greenhouses and making fruits and vegetables such as cucumbers and tomatoes. And he has been pivotal, really important in our development of Mycro Harvest, because his experience has been a wealth of knowledge for us to draw from in order to really refine what areas to focus on and which ones to spend less energy on, because as a team of just me and Justin, we have very limited resources. And so that was really pivotal in kind of deciding which areas we should really, really hone in on. And one of the key areas was figuring out that mushrooms is actually a great base produce to really focus on for artificial intelligence.
I just want to jump back really quick to add some context to the conversation with Dave Hunter. His background is heavy duty in algorithmic trading
Yes.
and financial instruments. Mm-hmm. Interesting to see that pivot from, giant banks and hedge funds into AI-enabled food security. Do you know? I mean, I guess we shouldn't ask you to speak for him, but do you know how that came about and how he jumped into that new industry?
I think that there are actually, despite the worlds apart of those two industries, I think there are a lot of things that are very they're parallel between the two, especially when you look at kind of the structure of the algorithms and how those have to come together and what your data points are. So despite them being wildly different industries, I think that there is there is still definitely some connections between the algorithms that you use for deciding which stocks to trade and identifying which fruit are ready to be picked. So there's definitely parallels there, despite the worlds of difference in the industries that they're applied to.
That's a great analogy. It's great to see these people who are at the forefront of different industries sort of coming together in agriculture, and something I've noticed just in general in my work in the industry is you're seeing folks who you would not expect in a boardroom talking about some new ag tech. They're there and they're bringing money and they're bringing that startup and entrepreneurial mindset to the industry, which is awesome. Actually, just to kind of build on that point, I actually think it's really important to do so, because feeding everyone should be at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And the tech world moves very quickly, and it's been quite a change to go from that world to that of agriculture, where decisions are made very calculated and a lot slower. But these are industries that, in general, have not been, specifically the mushroom space, has not experienced a lot of automation or technological transformation. But now farmers are getting older. The technical knowledge is starting to be lost in a lot of ways, because the newer farmers are not wanting to engage at the same level or dedicate themselves in the same way. And so really securing our source of food is extremely important. And so despite it being an extremely traditional kind of industry, I think it's really important that we have a lot of these tech entrepreneurs really at the frontier to be part of this process, and really pushing the boundaries of what we're able to achieve with something so essential such as food.
Who introduced the shipping container method to you guys?
So the shipping container method and growing in shipping containers has been around for a while, but it's been very difficult to do so reliably, and that's because of the environmental controls. But the main reason that we think that it's a really effective use case specifically for mushrooms is because it allows us to standardize the grow room, so that way our algorithms that we're developing can be applied to a grow room anywhere in the world.
Absolutely. And the land use part of it comes into play as well. I live not far from a mushroom farm, a couple kilometers to my south, and the footprint of the place is astonishing. It's an absolutely massive structure. And I wonder, with automation and tech and AI and a container-based solution, how many of your containers would it take to displace the footprint of that building? Maybe less. Maybe you can save a whole bunch of land there that can be put to use for other things.
Definitely, and that's one of the also huge pluses for controlled environment agriculture, is that we can do so in such a small footprint with using such minimal resources. So that is one of the really interesting areas, because we can actually cultivate food a lot closer to home than what one would normally expect.
Yep, absolutely.
Agree. I guess we could wrap up. Thank you, Chris.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for having me on the podcast. Tracy, Braden, really appreciated it.
We'll be right back after this short break.
BioEnterprise is Canada's engine for food and agricultural technologies. It is a vibrant community of entrepreneurs, researchers, accelerators, and partners. They are all committed to driving industrial innovation. Head to bioenterprise.ca to discover how your tech or food and beverage company can flourish with the support of BioEnterprise Canada.
We return to the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast with co-hosts Braden Kemp and Tracy Morningstar.
Every time we do an interview, Braden, with a new innovator, I'm encouraged by the knowledge I'm walking away with. Like the ability to be able to have fresh mushrooms in our grocery stores or in our farmers market, to me, is very unique to Canada. And I'm excited to what Christopher is going to bring to our tables.
Yeah, it's interesting. You do a little bit of research on the topic for the guest that's coming in, and you kind of think you have a little bit of an idea of what's going on, and then these folks, these entrepreneurs, they understand their game at a different level, and Chris was really effective at communicating what he does and the business that he's in to us in a way that I understood it. And I, as I mentioned in the interview, I have a little bit of enthusiasm for gathering mushrooms from the forest floor, but certainly learned more from Chris than I would have imagined.
Absolutely. One of the other things that I really felt he brought to the table was his ability to innovate a product, use material such as the shipping containers, and actually we have several shipping containers, that are not being used, and it's something that's reusable, and it's producing a product that everybody, I'm sure, is excited about and can't wait till we actually start seeing it available to us.
Yeah, the shipping containers, or the sea cans, are an interesting resource, and we've been hearing for a long time now that this wave of agriculture, of automated agriculture on a smaller footprint was coming, but it seems like just now it's actually starting to hit the ground, and we're seeing things like Mycro Harvest come out, producing really impressive quantities of food in a small space. So that's neat to see the resource being used that way.
Yeah, exactly. And the only reason why I was a chef in another world, but as a chef, the reason why I never actually started using the product is because the product was very hard to find. And to think that we have a future that product that was not always readily available is going to start being available. That's exciting. As it says on Christopher's website, we have unlocked the power of mushrooms. Thank you, Christopher Klich of Mycro Harvest, and thank you to my co-host, Braden Kemp. And thank you for listening to the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast. See you all next time.
This edition of the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast was made possible with the support of FedDev Ontario and the Government of Canada. Special thanks to Victoria Pichler. The executive producer of Frontier Entrepreneurship is Robert Washburn. I'm John Hayden. To find out more, head to our website, ncfdc.ca. That's ncfdc.ca. Thanks for listening.